Welcome back to the third lesson of our Blender for Production tutorial series about 2D and 3D tracking inside of Blender. My name is Helge Maus from Pixeltrain. After we have set up now our movie clip editor with our clip here, we want now to take a look into the 2D tracking settings. And to understand what tracking is, we first have to think about what a track really is and how it works. What a tracker does is you define by yourself a pattern which you want to follow over the whole clip. For example, you can say, I want to have this logo here of the car. This is my pattern. And then I tell Blender that he tries now in every frame to find this pattern. And the path this pattern now is taking through the shot is then stored as coordinates data, and we can then use this data for different kind of jobs or uses. We can pin 3D objects like a particle system to this point, or we can replace the number plate of this car, for example. If we have here 4 points and we know exactly how big here this number plate is in every frame, so we can have more than one tracker, 4 trackers for example. We can stabilize the shot so that this logo is always in the middle of the plate, and the plate is moved against that so that it stays steady. This is stabilization. We will take a look into something like that later. Then we can also help us in the masking process or rotoscoping. You have maybe seen that we also have, here, a masking area inside of this environment where we can draw masks for rotoscoping, using them later in the compositor, and we can move these masks with the help of trackers. There are many uses for trackers, and the most important one, also the focus of this series, is then that we can use a bunch of trackers to recalculate the camera movement of the rear plate, to then have a moving camera in 3D and film with this moving camera our 3D objects, our 3D scene, and then make a composite which fits. So this is then camera tracking, or if we also want to know how this car, for example, moves through the scene, then this is named object tracking. But these are the topics in later lessons. In this lesson now, we want really to understand how to track something. And the basic for this is also named marker. A marker is the definition of a pattern, and then if we track a marker, we get a so-named track. So this is the naming convention here, but I think I will later flip these names around, marker, tracks. But I think official defining a pattern here is done with a marker, and if you track it then it's a track. Let's get started. We have here our scene from the last lesson here set up, and I make sure that this is an image sequence that the frame rate is correct. I see here it's 24 frames per second. That's not correct. I think the original footage was 30 frames per second. And if you haven't done this, we set our scene frames here so that our project is exactly as long as this shot, and then we can prefetch our material. If Blender now crashes on your side, then keep in mind that the prefetching means that all these frames are now read into memory of Blender. You remember we talked about here the memory usage, and that Blender itself has a limit of this memory. You can go into Edit Preferences, then into System, and here you set the memory limit of your video sequencer. If it crashes, most of the cases you run out of this memory. You can increase that if you have enough RAM on your machine, or what you also can do is you can use low-res versions or smaller versions of your footage. For this, please go back to the first lesson and make a new version of your image sequence. For example, a little bit smaller, so you can make a lower resolution for your video and then come back here and read it in again. If you want to have exact these data packages which I use here, you find them on my Gumroad or my Patreon. Let's prefetch now this scene. You see all the files are now in memory. It's 1.7 gig at the moment, so it's not too big. And now we can start with our first track here. To make a good track, we need a contrasty point. And for this first lesson where we use a track, I want to use this white sign here. To add now a tracker, we first need a marker. You remember the naming convention. So on the left here in the T menu, under track, we have here a section for adding markers. The settings or the tracking settings for these markers are set here. We will talk about all these options. Keep in mind that these settings here are used if you generate a marker. If you have made a marker before and you select it, you can't change the values here anymore. These are only for the new markers. If you want to really work with the track itself, so also later you want to change something, we have here in the N menu, so N key on your keyboard, under track here the tracking settings for a selected marker. You will see that in a moment. In the moment we don't have an active track. So to add a marker, we can go here to marker, click this add here, and now we are in a tool. You see that here on the left in the status bar, and now you can click somewhere to set a marker. For example, here. Now you see, now this marker here is selected, and here on the track we have now the same settings again. You see, these settings here are now on this marker, and if you now want to change something, you can do it here if you like. Let's first increase this window here a little bit, because this here is now the pattern which we search, and the pattern is defined by this area here. So this is the so-named pattern area. This pattern area can be now moved around with, for example, the G key. You can move now the pattern here around. You also can scale it with the S key. So it's like everywhere in Blender, it works like expected. Nice thing. Let's generate a marker again, but this time not with this marker tool. If you want to delete a marker, select it, it's selected, and then press the X key on your keyboard, delete the track, and now it's gone again. Let's learn a faster way in generating markers. Hold down the Control key and click somewhere with your mouse. You get a marker with the settings which were set here before. So normally this here is my preset. If you now want to have it more clever, I delete it, you can directly adjust the marker setting while you are generating them. So press Command, click somewhere, and now I hold down my left mouse button. I'm directly in the grab mode, so the keyboard shortcut Control click is in reality also a slide marker option, so you can move it directly here around. If you want to have this slower, more precise, you can hold down the Shift key while you are doing that. And you can check your work here always in this window. So that's the idea behind that. Let's talk a little bit about this window here. We have this pattern here, and this is the area which it shows. And maybe you see, let's make a new marker, only that you see it a little bit better. Let's make a nonsense marker here. You see how pixelated this area is? Let's make a marker here, Control click. And compare this pixelated area, I make it a little bit smaller, with this image here. And you see that this pixelated image is blurry, or better to say, it's soft here. So if you have footage and this footage is not high res, you have pixels and these jump around, and this would be extremely hard to track because the pattern is not really recognizable anymore. But to prevent that, Blender is always interpolating this footage. The world Blender sees the footage is that here. So that's the difference between these two windows. Here we have the original look, and this here is the interpolated look, which Blender sees. And we can have much more interpolation here. You see here channels and things like that. But this is a topic for a later lesson. In the middle of a tracker, I think we can switch the track again. So I click now onto this track. You see, that's the way of jumping around. This track is still there, but I want to see now this here. In the middle of a track, we have this yellow cross, and you see I can also move my tracker here, or my marker, by clicking into this window and moving it around. And also the Shift key here for precise mode works. Like I've told you in the intro, the thing which we get as a result is the coordinate of the pattern in every frame, and the coordinate is this reference point here. So while you are tracking, you can scale your pattern around, you can also rotate it here with this handle, so this is scale and rotate at the same time. You also can deform your pattern here. You will see later in different motion models which we use that Blender will deform the pattern so that it follows a perspective. No problem at all, because this reference point is always in the middle. You see, Blender makes a great job of holding this point in the middle. So you can change your pattern while you are tracking, or better to say, you can change the scale, the orientation, and also the perspective of your pattern in every frame. You don't make a problem in your reference point with that. So that's a big advantage of the whole thing here. To see a little bit more information about a marker, you can go here under track to marker. You see here's the position, so the reference point. Later we will make offset tracking in later tutorials, so this is something you can do here. And this is the average size of the pattern, which you also can change. And then we have a search area, and we haven't talked about the search area yet, so make this a little bit more square again. What is the search area? In the intro I told you we try to find this pattern now in every frame of the footage. If you now look around here, you maybe will see many of white planes in this footage. And so Blender would have to go through the whole plate to find this pattern in the next frame. And this is much work, and it will be slow like hell. To prevent that, we have an area where we say try to find the pattern only here, and this is the named search area. But we don't see it, we only have values here for them. And like I've said, you can predefine that somewhere here, also search size, here it is. To see the search area, you can use a keyboard shortcut, which is Alt-S. Or what you can do, and this is a quite important menu, it's overlooked a lot, you have here the clip display. And in this clip display, you can change your viewport for the motion clip editor. And we have here the pattern, which you can make visible or not visible. You can have the path later, and also you can make this search area visible or not visible. But I normally use the keyboard shortcut Alt-S for that. In the next frame, Blender will try to find in this box here the pattern. And sometimes it works, and sometimes your footage is changing too fast. You have a movement which goes from left to right or top and down, and so this area is too small. To change that, you can grab this corner here and scale it. But keep in mind, the bigger the pattern, the slower finding this pattern here. But if in the next frame, in exactly this area here, we don't find that because the camera was too fast and it's now here, it will fail the track. So you have to find a good size for this area here. What you also can do, it's a little bit hidden, is while you are dragging here the size, you can hold down the Control key and then you can change here also the direction of the rectangle. So if you have a movement from left to right, it makes more sense to have it here wider but not so high. This is also quite useful sometimes. Like I've said, you first have to start scaling and then you hold down your Control key on your keyboard. And this here is for moving the tracking area. If you know that the pattern is moving to the right, you can move this search area to the right side if you like that. Okay, I think that's enough about defining now this guy here. Let's get rid of this guy here. I selected X key, goodbye. I select this guy here again. And if you want to track more than one tracker, you have to select it. So the A key selects and deselects like everywhere in Blender. This here is now selected. And we try that this reference point is somewhere where we find it later. So if you have a plane like this, it's always good to have a reference point for yourself so that you can correct it. For example, you try to have exactly the center of this area, or you try to find a corner. So it doesn't make sense to track something like this here, because this is something, if you have motion blur, you don't find anymore. Let's say we want to track exactly the center here of this guy. To track now, we are in frame 0 here. We can now go into the track navigation and we find it here. at this point. These are the tracking tools. We also have them here. So same thing. The only thing which is missing is, I think, these two here, which are not here. Now it's only refine. For the first step, you can work with that here. I will tell you in a moment the keyboard shortcuts, but if you now want to find this point in the next frame, you can go now here to this point here on the right, and here you see track the selected marker forward exactly 1 frame. We do that and we see we track now every time you click here this marker, and you see the plate moves a little bit and also this marker or track moves. What you also see is here in the dope sheet. Let's home that, so go into that and click home so that you see exactly here the length of our track. Make it a little bit bigger, maybe something like that. You see we have now 11 frames. You also see it here in the graph view that we have 11 frames here. And we see this little track here. If you don't see that, check that the path here is on. So this is the movement of this point. You can go now here and click forever on frame forward. What you also can do, and this is the way I normally work, is I use the keyboard shortcut for that. So I hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, and then I use the arrow keys on my keyboard. So I track 1 frame to the right if I hold down Alt and use the arrow to the right. Same for left. So Alt key, left arrow tracks backwards. And this is something I've learned really early in my VFX career, that automatic tracking is great, but for really hard shots, I go really frame by frame because my eyes are not here. My eyes are always on this image here. So because this here is exactly where I want to have this point. And yeah, I want to prevent this track from sliding. So this is okay. Alt, and then I go with the arrow keys, and if I see some sliding here, I can correct that. And if you are correcting something interesting happens. Go back here to that here and I zoom out. You see here in the dope sheet that we get a keyframe here. You also see the keyframe. If I go here a little bit back, you see here is a yellow frame, the same like here. Blender stores the pattern and also the search area and things like that in keyframes. That means that Blender is still searching until this frame here has exactly the pattern which it has stored in the first frame. You can change that. These are advanced tracking settings. We talk about that in the next lesson, but keep that in mind. If you want to tell Blender now, because the pattern has changed, or you want to have a correction, or you want to change the search area or the pattern area, you can do that by transforming here or here. So I can correct it here, and you can go here in the middle and say, yeah, this is a little bit off. So move that here and you see you get a new keyframe here, also here. Absolutely okay, you can correct always your track if you like. And at this moment in time, you store a new pattern and also the stuff around that. The same thing if you lose a track. You can enable a track again by correcting it. And this is something we now try. So let's go here to the last frame we had. And if I now move in my timeline with the right arrow key, not Alt right. Alt right means track. I only want to move in my timeline with right mouse button. You see that this track here is still visible, but it's disabled. You don't see here anything because we don't have data here at this point. And you also see it here. To enable a track later, there are different ways of doing that. You can enable a track by clicking here this little eye sign. You see the marker is disabled at the current frame. At the moment you click that, the tracker is now enabled, but you see it's really off because it wasn't tracked to this point. We only moved our timeline and then enabled it. So this position is wrong. You can correct it if you like. And now this makes more sense. But now you also have a new keyframe where the pattern is stored and so on. So let's go back here in our track a little bit to this keyframe here. And I want to get rid of all the data which is on the right side because I'm not really sure if this data is correct. To delete everything to a side, we have the clear option. to the left or to the right. Same here. So if you click that, Blender will delete for the selected track, and be aware if you have more than one track selected for all these tracks, everything which is on the right side or left side. So now we are back and safe. We can generate a new keyframe by moving it here. Or sometimes if you don't want to move, but you want to have a keyframe, you can go in here and press the S key for scaling it. And while you are scaling directly, you get a keyframe. So that's also a way of doing it. And now I want to track as far as Blender can go. So what do we do for that? There's an option for that. You see, if you now go here to track, we used this one frame. Here is the track this marker until you come to the end of the entire clip. The shortcut for this is Command T. Yeah, it's a good keyboard shortcut for track. Command T tracks forward. And if you want to track backward, something we do later, you can use Shift Command T. If you want to track now forward and your plate moves a lot, what you also can do is you can lock your track into the viewer. That's quite cool. For example, you say, I want to see this thing here all the time. Here it is at this position on my monitor. And now I can press the L key like lock. And you see, we get here a little lock icon. Not the track is locked, only the view of the track is locked here. And you see this little lock here is activated. So this is a toggle. Now we have locked our view to this tracker here. And if we now press Command T, Blender has finished the track. And you see how fast Blender is in tracking here. And that's really amazing. Blender's tracker is amazing fast. And it really reaches the end of the whole thing. If you now scrub around, you maybe see something interesting. I zoom a little bit out. Do you see that through this lock here, so our view is locked now through this point, this plate is stabilized because you said, I want to have this tracker always at this position on my monitor. Yeah, and you see this is a stabilization. Yeah, the plate moves now, but not the tracker. So this is a good indicator for locking a track. I unlock it by pressing the L key while this here is selected again. And now you see, now the plate stays and the tracker is moving again. Great, now we have made our first track. To prevent this tracker now from changes, like I've said, if you select a tracker and you have a bunch of tracker, every tracker which is selected is tracked again. And maybe you want to prevent that by accident. So you can lock now the track itself. So this is different from locking the view on the track. So for locking this tracker, you press Command L. And then you see you have no widgets here around that anymore. And here on the track, we have a new lock, but this here is now the lock. So this track is locked now. We can name this white thing. Yeah. And you also see it here, the name. You know now exactly what this tracker is doing. Let's try our new knowledge now for something else. I jump to the end of the timeline with Shift right arrow here, and let's go to the right side here and try something else, something easy. Let's track this area here. Command click here. Now I correct my pattern and I can say I want to have here my reference point. You can press the S key. By the way, if you don't want to see the search area all the time, you can press Alt S again to get rid of that. We don't need it. We have seen that it's big enough. Maybe the pattern is a little bit too big, so make it smaller, correct that here. And now we want to track backwards. What you see now here in the graph view is that we still see here the position data of our white track. It's a little bit grayed out. If you only want to see the track you are working with, you can do that by going here on the right side. We have some options here, and here you can say, show me only the selected stuff. And then this here is clear, but this here makes sense later for analyzing. So I deactivate this option. I want to see everything. And here in the dope sheet, we also have this option here. And we also have here now a new track which we have made. The first keyframe is set here, but yeah, we see we have no data here at all. So this time we want to track backwards, and for doing that we can use now this icon. So track marker, the entire click, track backwards, Shift Command T, and to lock that into the view I press the L key, or here this lock, so I know that this here is now always at this point, and now I press Command Shift T to track. Okay, it has tracked really fast. Now we can check if everything fits, and if you find that the track was lost, you can go to the frame, correct it, set a keyframe with that. Now we have here a keyframe. You remember, you can make it safe to delete now, to the left for example, everything. Now we have deleted it, and now you can press Alt and the left arrow for example to track now frame by frame, or Command Shift T with the new information to track to the end. So you see, it's really second nature after you've done it sometimes. It's really easy to do. Okay, let's lock this again. Command L and name this is the red thing. Okay, now we have two trackers here. And now we want to have a little bit of a hard tracker. So let's go here and we want to track this logo now. Okay, let's command click here. Correct it first. Okay. Make sure that this yellow cross is in the middle of the thing. Alt S to see the search area. We know, if we scrub here around, that our car is going downwards and to the left. So if we are here, you see there's the logo at the middle. If we go now one frame farther, you see we are still in the search area. So I think the search area doesn't need to be too big, but if you want, you can scale and then hold the Control key and make it a little bit more rectangular like this here. Only to play with that, and we can bring it a little bit to the left. Okay, so let's correct that so that it's really at the point where we want to have it. I see that I'm not in the first frame, so I made a little mess here. You see I have a second keyframe here, and what we can do here is I go here to the second keyframe, which I like, and now I delete everything which is on the left side. Okay, you see, goodbye. And now we track Alt left arrow to the left to have an information on this side. Great. Now we go one frame to the front again, and now we want to track forward, and we lock. We say L so that it stays here. And this time I want to have more control about the tracking process. Like I've said, in practice, I really often track frame by frame because I want to have the complete control. But you also can say, okay, I want to get Blender the job, but I still want to have more control. And to do that, we can go into the tracking settings here. We will talk about all these tracking settings in one of the next lessons, and go then into the tracking settings extras. There's the speed of the track, and the funny thing is we can slow it down. Instead of fastest, which is nearly not controllable for me, I can say make it only real time, so 30 frames a second. And like I told you, my eyes are now here so that I can check what the pattern is doing, and I now press Command T. And now you see it works somehow. But now we have a problem, and this is a perspective problem because the car is coming towards us. So the pattern is more and more scaled up. It changes to that, and at some point suddenly Blender says, okay, I can't find the pattern anymore. Why? Because this pattern area is now too small, or maybe the pattern has changed too much, or both. We will talk about these advanced tracking settings in the next lesson, but to correct that now, what we can do is we go a little bit backwards here to frame 30, and now I can delete everything on the right side. You see that's made here or here. We have used that before. So delete everything here, and then I correct my result a little bit here, and I scale up now my pattern. And now I hold down Alt right arrows, and you can hold this really down and you see it drifts away. And this is something we have to fix in the next lesson. But what the takeaway of that here is that you have more control by slowing the whole thing down. And if you have a track which is so okay, but you want to change some frames you see, you can go through an existing track and change every frame later. I press the G key here to move that, and I don't retrack. I say it's okay if I correct something like that. Or what you can do is you delete if it's really off, something like that here, or you overtrack it. So you go here, say that's the point I want to have, and then Alt right arrows here. I go a little bit to the side and so on. Okay, I think I've finished that now here. And I don't want to track it to the end because this tutorial is long enough for today. So Control L to lock this thing. And we say this is the logo. And now we have 3 tracks here in our scene. And what we now want to do is I want to show you how you can bring this data into 3D. This is not a 3D track. It is really a 2D technique. But I like it a lot because, for example, you now want to pin a particle system somewhere in a 3D scene, which you overlay later in compositing, or you want to have a sign or a text or something like that here in your scene. Then you can use this pseudo 3D approach, which I show you now. Let's open this here a little bit more. Here's a 3D view. You also can say, okay, I need another 3D layout here. So click here at workspace and I say I want to have a layout. So this is 3D. And the only thing we have in our 3D world here at the moment is a camera, which has nothing on it. So this is a standard camera. And yeah, let's go back to the motion tracking. What we now can do is we can select all our trackers, A key, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, now all the 3 trackers are selected. And we then can go into this menu here and say, I want to have a reconstruction now. And what we now can do is we go here and say, we want to generate in our 3D space empties for every active track. And if you do that now, you see that in our outliner, we have 3 empties, logo, red thing, white thing. And now let's switch over to layout. We have here now an interesting setup. We have 3 empties and we have these blue lines here. And these blue lines come from this here. We have a constraint on these objects. And the takeaway of this part of the lesson is that you can use this constraint on every object which you have. So this here reads information from the tracking world. This constraint here, if you go into the constraints, is from motion tracking here, and we have 3 constraints here, a camera solver constraint, a follow track constraint, and an object solver constraint. And this here is a follow track constraint. And what we have here now is we ask for the movie clip, and the movie clip is storing all the information. Yeah, so this is the street sequence movie clip here. We can rename that if you like. We say here is our streets. Yeah, so this is the movie clip, and you can have more than 1 movie clip later. In your scene, you have more than 1 track, and you will see that this here also has changed. Then we have a camera here, which is this one here. And now we ask for every of these empties, all 3 empties have the same constraint here, for position information. And here you see these are the positions of our 3 trackers. Interesting enough is that it seems that these are in 3D space. Is this a 3D solve? No, it isn't. If you compare now the positions here, you see they are on the same plane, which is not here. You see the car at the moment is in the front, this is in the back, and this is more in the back. But what it is, it's a projection to the camera. So let's look through the camera. So press the 0 key on the numpad, or click here to the camera symbol. And now you see that we have here now these empties in front of the camera, and they are moving around. And now you see this is the movement here of the car, and this is moving because the plate moves. let's make this more obvious. Take the camera and we go into the camera settings, here to background images. I activate now a background image, and with this technique I normally can make a camera background image. We can go here to the movie clip and say take this streets movie clip here, and now we see it in the background. Like I've said, we also can go here to image and load a new image sequence, and if it's exactly the right one, because you have adjusted your colors for the movie clip and the contrast, you remember we talked about that in a lesson before, then you can read now the original plate. But we use at the moment the movie clip, which is in streets. And now you can see that the positions here are really the positions where these trackers were, because they are now in front of the camera. And if you now say, okay, that's cool, I want to have, for example, here a text sitting, you can do that. I go out here and I add, for example, let's go here in, say we want to have a text here. Let's say this is car. Then we can take this car text and parent it to this empty. So I select first the text, then I select this empty here, and then I press Command P for parenting, or I go to Object, Parent, Object. Now these two are parented to each other. Better to say the car is parented as a child to this here. And then we have to go here to the car and have to change now the appearance of the whole thing. So let's go here and say, I want to bring it up here, rotation. Let's look through the camera so that we can see how it looks. Okay. And now you see this here is now moving together with the car through the scene. And this is something you now can render and comp over the original plate. Like I've said, really often we have explosions which move because we want to have the camera movement in it, or something else like a particle system or so. This is a technique you can use. At the end, one thing I think it's important to know, that everything here, these positions are depending on the camera which you have. And this was the original position of the camera which was there. Sometimes this here is too big or too small. If you move now your camera with the G key, you see Blender is clever enough through the constraint to change here the positions of these null objects. I hope you learned something in this lesson, and you have seen now the basics of a 2D track and how you can use it. In the next lesson, I want to dive deeper into tracking settings. We have a lot to cover here. If you like these kinds of tutorials, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and see you in the next lesson.